I've always believed that the smallest structural flaws reveal the biggest problems. 20 years as a civil engineer taught me that. What I didn't expect was to apply that principle to my marriage at 3 in the morning, watching my wife Hazel slip through our front door like a shadow. Rylan? Her voice carried that careful tone she used when testing uncertain ground. I thought you were in Portland until Thursday. The Portland conference had been canceled 6 hours ago due to a hotel fire. I'd driven straight home instead of calling ahead, a decision that now felt prophetic. Hazel stood in our entryway wearing a black dress I'd never seen before, her research lab ID badge conspicuously absent. "Client emergency," I said, studying her face. "You know how it is with pharmaceutical consulting. When the FDA calls, you answer." She nodded too quickly. "Of course. I was just—" Miriam needed help with her mother's estate paperwork. You remember Miriam from the lab? I remembered Miriam, 60-year-old grandmother who'd raised 4 kids alone and could handle estate paperwork in her sleep. The lie sat between us like a hairline crack in concrete, small now, but destined to grow. "Must have been complex paperwork," I said. "Your phone went straight to voicemail for 6 hours. Hazel's laugh sounded brittle. "You know how those old houses are? Terrible cell reception." She kicked off heels I'd never seen either, expensive ones that didn't match her usual practical style. "I should shower. Early meeting tomorrow." As she headed upstairs, her purse slipped from her shoulder. The contents scattered across our hardwood floor: a wallet, keys, lip gloss, and a hotel keycard from the Marriott downtown. The same hotel where I'd stayed during our anniversary last year. I picked up the keycard, turning it over in my hands. Room 1247. The plastic was warm, recently used. "Hazel," I called up the stairs. "You dropped something." The shower was already running. Either she hadn't heard me or she was pretending not to. I slipped the keycard into my pocket and began collecting the rest of her scattered belongings. Her wallet had fallen open, revealing something that made my chest tighten: a receipt from Chez Laurent, the French restaurant across from the Marriott. Dinner for 2, ordered at 9:30 p.m., wine, appetizers, 2 entrees. The total was $247, more than Hazel typically spent on groceries in a week. But it wasn't the amount that bothered me. It was the signature on the credit card receipt. The name wasn't Hazel Ventor or even her maiden name. It was signed D. Vossel. I photographed the receipt with my phone before placing everything back in her purse. Then I sat in my home office, staring at the hotel keycard and trying to remember when my wife had started lying to me. The house felt different now, like a structure I'd designed but never really examined. Every creak of the floorboards above sounded deliberate. Every shadow seemed to hide something. I'd built this place with my own hands 5 years ago, incorporating all the latest security features and energy-efficient systems. It was supposed to be our sanctuary. Now it felt like a crime scene waiting to be discovered. I opened my laptop and ran a simple internet search. D. Vossel, Portland, Oregon. The results loaded slowly, as if the universe was giving me one last chance to remain ignorant. But ignorance is a luxury engineers can't afford. We deal in facts, measurements, and structural integrity. The first result was a LinkedIn profile. Damon Vossel, investment consultant. The photo showed a man about my age with the kind of practiced smile that belonged in pharmaceutical sales brochures. His employment history was impressive but vague. Lots of strategic partnerships and portfolio optimization, without specific company names or dates. The second result was more interesting, a news article from the Portland Business Journal dated 18 months ago. Local investment advisor sentenced in securities fraud case. The article included Damon's photo and a brief description of his crimes: falsifying client portfolios, misappropriating funds, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Sentence: 18 months in federal prison. I checked the date again. If he'd served the full sentence, he would have been released about 4 months ago. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Thanks for tonight. Your husband seems like the trusting type. Lucky for us." I read it 3 times before realizing it had been sent to my number by mistake. The message was clearly meant for Hazel. I screenshot it immediately, then blocked the number. Upstairs, the shower had stopped running. I could hear Hazel moving around our bedroom, opening and closing drawers. Normal sounds that now felt loaded with meaning. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, trying to process what I'd learned in the past 20 minutes. My wife was having an affair with a convicted felon who'd been released from federal prison 4 months ago. She was using fake names at restaurants and staying in hotels with him, and he was cocky enough to text about it. The rational part of my mind insisted there might be an explanation. Maybe Damon was a client at her research lab. Maybe the dinner was business-related. Maybe the hotel keycard was from a conference. But engineers don't get paid to believe in coincidences. We get paid to identify problems and fix them. Rylan? Hazel appeared in the kitchen doorway wearing her usual pajamas, soft cotton pants, and an oversized t-shirt from a pharmaceutical conference. She looked like the woman I'd married, but something in her eyes had changed. Are you okay? You look pale. Just tired, I said. Long drive from Portland. She nodded and opened the refrigerator, pulling out a bottle of water. Her movements seemed rehearsed, like she was performing the role of a normal wife having a normal conversation with her normal husband. How was the conference? She asked. Cancelled. Hotel fire. Oh no. Was anyone hurt? The concern in her voice sounded genuine, which somehow made everything worse. She could lie about spending the evening with another man, but she still worried about strangers in a hotel fire. Everyone got out safely, I said. Just property damage. That's good. She twisted the cap off her water bottle. I should get some sleep. Early day tomorrow. What's the project? Just routine stuff. Data analysis for the Morrison trial. I nodded like I believed her. But I'd been married to Hazel for 7 years, and I knew her work schedule better than she thought. The Morrison trial had been completed 6 months ago. The final reports were already submitted to the FDA. Good luck with that, I said. She kissed my cheek, a quick, obligatory gesture, and headed back upstairs. I listened to her footsteps cross the bedroom floor, heard the bed creak as she settled in. I waited another hour before following her upstairs. Hazel was lying on her side, breathing deeply in what appeared to be sleep. But her phone was face down on the nightstand, and I could see the faint glow of the screen through the case. She was awake, texting someone. I undressed quietly and slipped into bed beside her. The mattress shifted slightly, but she didn't acknowledge my presence. Her breathing remained artificially steady. I stared at the ceiling and tried to remember the last time we'd had a real conversation, not the surface-level exchanges about work and groceries and weekend plans, but the kind of deep, honest communication that had characterized our early relationship. It had been months, maybe longer. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle echoed across the city. The sound was mournful and familiar, a reminder that Portland was still a working town despite all the tech companies and artisanal coffee shops. I'd grown up here, watched it change, adapted my business to serve its evolving needs. But I'd apparently failed to notice the changes happening in my own home. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Hazel's voice drifting up from the kitchen. She was on the phone, speaking in the low, careful tones she used for work calls. No, that won't work, she was saying. The timeline is too aggressive. We need at least another week to adjust the parameters. I checked my phone, 6:47 a.m. Early for work calls, even in pharmaceutical research. I dressed quietly and made my way downstairs, timing my arrival to seem casual. Morning, I said, heading for the coffee maker. Hazel looked up from her phone, startled. Oh, good morning. I didn't hear you get up. Who was that? Dr. Patterson. You know how he gets about project deadlines. Dr. Patterson was Hazel's supervisor at Pacific Research Labs, a cautious man in his 60s who rarely called anyone before 9 a.m. But I didn't challenge the lie. Instead, I poured coffee and watched my wife's reflection in the kitchen window. She was wearing a navy blue dress I'd never seen before, more formal than her usual lab attire. Her makeup was carefully applied, and she'd styled her hair in loose waves instead of her typical ponytail. Special meeting today? I asked. Board presentation. You know how it is? I didn't know how it was. Hazel had never mentioned a board presentation, and Pacific Research Labs was a small company that rarely held formal board meetings. What's the presentation about? The Morrison trial follow-up. Regulatory compliance stuff. Pretty boring. The Morrison trial again. I made a mental note to verify its current status. Well, you look great, I said, which was true. She did look great. That was part of the problem. Hazel smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Thanks, I should go. Traffic's going to be terrible. She kissed my cheek again, the same quick, obligatory gesture from the night before, and grabbed her purse from the counter. The hotel keycard was no longer visible, but I wondered if it was still there, tucked away in some hidden pocket. Have a good day, I said. You too. I watched through the window as she backed out of our driveway in her silver Honda Accord. She turned left toward downtown instead of right toward the research lab. Pacific Research Labs was located in the industrial district, 15 minutes east of our house. Downtown was the opposite direction. I finished my coffee and called my assistant. Jennifer, it's Rylan. I need you to clear my morning. Something urgent came up. Of course. Should I reschedule the Henderson meeting? Push it to Thursday. And Jennifer, I need you to contact Grant Solin's office. Tell him I need to see him today. Personal matter. Grant Solon had been my roommate at Oregon State 20 years ago, back when we were both studying engineering. He'd switched to law school after graduation and now ran a successful practice specializing in corporate litigation and private investigations. We'd remained close friends, though we rarely discussed business. "I'll call right away," Jennifer said. "Is everything okay?" "Just need some legal advice. Nothing urgent." But it felt urgent. The lies were accumulating like stress fractures in a bridge support. Eventually, something would give way. I drove to Grant's office in downtown Portland, a sleek building near the courthouse with marble floors and brass fixtures that screamed expensive legal services. Grant's assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Carol, led me to his corner office overlooking the Willamette River. "Rylan." Grant stood up from behind his desk, extending a hand. He was tall and lean, with graying hair and the kind of confident bearing that came from winning difficult cases. Carol said it was personal. "Everything all right? I need you to run a background check on someone." Grant's expression shifted to professional interest. "Okay, who?" "Damon Vossel. He's involved with my wife." I explained what I'd discovered the night before: the hotel keycard, the restaurant receipt, the text message, the federal prison sentence. Grant listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. "How long has this been going on?" he asked when I finished. I don't know. I only found out last night." "And you want me to investigate this Damon character?" "I want to know everything: his criminal history, his current situation, how he met Hazel, what he's been doing since his release from prison." Grant nodded slowly. "I can do that. But Rylan, I have to ask, what's your end goal here? Are you thinking about divorce, criminal charges, or do you just want information?" "I want the truth. The truth can be expensive, and it might not be what you want to hear." "I'm an engineer, Grant. I deal with structural problems for a living. The truth is always better than a collapse." Grant smiled grimly. "All right. Give me 48 hours. I'll have my investigator pull everything we can find on Damon Vossel. Criminal records, financial history, employment, associates, the works." "What about Hazel? What about her?" "Can you investigate her activities? Phone records, credit card statements, travel history?" Grant leaned back in his chair. "That's trickier. She's your wife, so there are some things you can access legally. But if she's been careful about covering her tracks, we might need to get creative." "How creative?" "Let's start with the legal stuff and see what we find. If we need to dig deeper, we'll discuss options." I left Grant's office feeling like I'd taken the first step towards something irreversible. The rational part of my mind insisted I might be overreacting. Maybe there was an innocent explanation for everything. Maybe Hazel would come home that evening with a reasonable story that would make me feel foolish for doubting her. But the engineer in me knew better. Structural failures didn't happen suddenly. They were the result of accumulated stress over time, small compromises that eventually led to catastrophic collapse. I drove home and spent the afternoon in my workshop, a converted garage where I kept my tools and drafting equipment. Working with my hands had always been therapeutic, a way to process complex problems through physical action. I was rebuilding the engine on a 1967 Mustang, a project I'd been tinkering with for 3 years, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Hazel's number. "Hey," I answered, wiping grease from my hands. "Hi, how's your day going?" "Good, working on the Mustang. How was the board presentation?" A brief pause. "It went well. Dr. Patterson was pleased with the preliminary findings." "That's great. What time will you be home?" Another pause. "Actually, I might be late. The team wants to grab dinner and discuss next steps. You know how these things go." I didn't know how these things went. Hazel had never mentioned work dinners before, and Pacific Research Labs employed fewer than 30 people. The idea of a team dinner seemed unlikely. "Where are you going?" "Probably just the brewery near the lab. Nothing fancy." The brewery near Pacific Research Labs was a dive bar called Murphy's that served microwaved food and watered-down drinks. It wasn't the kind of place where research teams held strategy dinners. "Okay," I said. "Don't wait up if you're going to be really late." "I won't. Love you." "Love you too." The words felt hollow, like we were reading from a script neither of us believed anymore. I hung up and returned to the Mustang's engine, but my concentration was broken. Instead of focusing on carburetor adjustments, I found myself thinking about timelines and patterns. How long had Hazel been lying to me? How many work emergencies and team dinners had actually been meetings with Damon Vossel? At 8 o'clock, I ordered pizza and ate alone in front of the television, watching a documentary about bridge engineering. The narrator discussed the importance of regular inspections and preventive maintenance, concepts that seemed increasingly relevant to my personal situation. At 11 o'clock, I went to bed. Hazel still wasn't home. I lay awake listening for her car in the driveway, but eventually exhaustion took over. I woke briefly around 2 a.m. to the sound of the front door closing, but I didn't get up to investigate. Instead, I pretended to sleep as Hazel crept upstairs and slipped into bed beside me. She smelled like wine and unfamiliar cologne. Grant called the next afternoon while I was reviewing blueprints for a new hospital project in Bend. "I've got preliminary information on your friend Damon," he said. "Can you come in?" "On my way." I drove to Grant's office through afternoon traffic, my mind racing with possibilities. Whatever he'd found, it was significant enough to warrant an in-person meeting. Carol led me directly to Grant's office, where he was waiting with a thick manila folder and a grim expression. "Sit down," he said. "This is worse than we thought." He opened the folder and spread several documents across his desk: police reports, court filings, financial records, and surveillance photographs. Damon Vossel, age 41, born in Sacramento, moved to Portland 8 years ago. He was convicted of securities fraud 18 months ago, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. Grant pointed to a police report dated 3 years earlier. He was investigated for running a pharmaceutical investment scam, convinced elderly clients to invest in fake drug trials, then use their money for personal expenses. The case fell apart when key witnesses refused to testify. Witnesses refused? Intimidation. Nothing provable, but several people suddenly became very reluctant to cooperate with prosecutors. Grant showed me another document, a federal probation report. He was released from prison 4 months ago, as you suspected. He's supposed to be living in a halfway house in southeast Portland and checking in with a parole officer twice a week. Supposed to be? My investigator drove by the halfway house yesterday. Damon hasn't been seen there in 3 weeks. His parole officer has been trying to contact him. The implications were obvious. Damon was violating his parole by living elsewhere, which meant he was risking a return to federal prison. That level of risk suggested he had something significant to gain, or something significant to hide. "There's more," Grant continued. He showed me a series of financial records. Damon's been receiving regular cash deposits over the past 2 months. 5,000 here, 3,000 there, always in amounts small enough to avoid federal reporting requirements. Where's the money coming from? That's the interesting part. The deposits are made at different banks around the city, always in cash, always by a woman matching your wife's description. My stomach dropped. "You have proof it's Hazel?" "Not definitive proof, but the timing is suggestive. Every deposit corresponds with one of Hazel's supposed work emergencies or late meetings." Grant pulled out another set of documents, credit card statements and hotel receipts. My investigator also confirmed that Hazel has been staying at various hotels around the city over the past 2 months. Always paying cash, always registering under different names. What names? H. Trevon, H. Morrison, H. Patterson. All variations of names connected to her work. The pattern was becoming clear. Hazel wasn't just having an affair, she was funding Damon's lifestyle and helping him evade federal supervision. But where was she getting the money? "Grant, I need you to look into Hazel's work situation. Something doesn't add up about her job." "What kind of something?" "She keeps mentioning projects that I'm pretty sure don't exist. The Morrison trial, for instance. I think that was completed months ago." Grant made a note. "I'll have my investigator contact Pacific Research Labs, discreetly." "How discreetly?" "We'll pose as potential clients interested in their services. Standard corporate intelligence gathering." I left Grant's office with more questions than answers, but at least now I had a framework for understanding what was happening. Hazel wasn't just cheating on me, she was involved in something potentially criminal with a man who had already proven himself capable of fraud and manipulation. I drove home and found Hazel in the kitchen, preparing what appeared to be a normal dinner. She was wearing jeans and a sweater, looking relaxed and domestic. "How was your day?" she asked, not looking up from the stove. "Productive. Finished the preliminary drawings for the Bend project." "That's great. I know how much that contract means to you." She did know. We'd discussed the Bend Hospital project extensively when I was bidding for it 6 months ago. It was one of the largest contracts my firm had ever pursued, and winning it had been a significant milestone in my career. The fact that she remembered made her current deception even more painful. "How was your day?" I asked. "Busy. We're starting a new trial next week, so there's a lot of preparation involved." "What kind of trial?" "Cardiovascular medication. Phase 2 testing." I nodded like I understood, but I made a mental note to ask Grant to verify whether Pacific Research Labs was actually conducting any cardiovascular trials. We ate dinner while making small talk about work and weekend plans. Hazel seemed relaxed, even cheerful. If I hadn't known about Damon Vossel and the hotel keycards and the cash deposits, I would have thought we were having a perfectly normal evening. But I did know, and that knowledge colored every word, every gesture, every smile. After dinner, Hazel excused herself to take a shower. I waited until I heard the water running, then quietly searched her purse. The hotel keycard was gone, but I found something else, a prepaid cell phone tucked into a side pocket. I turned it on and scrolled through the message history. Most of the texts were to and from a contact labeled D. Meeting confirmed for tomorrow. Same place. Bring the usual amount. Your husband asked about work again, getting suspicious. Don't worry. Almost finished here. The most recent message, sent just an hour ago. Package ready for pickup. Thursday morning as planned. I photographed the messages, then turned off the phone and returned it to Hazel's purse. My hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from anger. The casual way they discussed deceiving me, the clinical efficiency of their planning, the complete absence of guilt or remorse. I went to my workshop and called Grant. I found something, I said, and told him about the prepaid phone and the messages. Package pickup? Grant sounded concerned. That suggests they're planning something specific, and soon. What kind of something? Given Damon's history with pharmaceutical fraud, I'd guess they're planning to steal something from your wife's lab. Research data, drug samples, something valuable. Can we stop them? Not without more evidence, but we can document everything and be ready to act when they make their move. What do you need from me? Keep doing what you're doing. Act normal, don't let Hazel know you're suspicious, and document everything you can. I'll have my investigator increase surveillance on both of them. Grant, there's something else. I want to know exactly what Hazel has been doing at work, who she's been meeting with, what projects she's actually working on, whether she's been accessing files she shouldn't have access to. That's going to require some creative investigation. Are you prepared for the legal implications? What kind of implications? If Hazel is stealing proprietary research data, she could face federal charges, corporate espionage, theft of trade secrets, conspiracy. We're talking about serious prison time. I thought about the woman upstairs, showering in our bathroom, sleeping in our bed, lying to my face every day. A month ago, the idea of Hazel facing criminal charges would have been unthinkable. Now it felt like an inevitable conclusion. Do what you need to do, I said. I hung up and sat in my workshop, surrounded by tools and half-finished projects, trying to process the magnitude of what I'd learned. My wife wasn't just having an affair, she was apparently planning to commit corporate espionage with a convicted felon who was already violating his federal parole. The smart thing would be to confront her immediately, to demand explanations and give her a chance to come clean. But engineers don't make decisions based on emotion. They gather data, analyze structural integrity, and plan for controlled demolition when necessary. I was going to let Hazel and Damon execute their plan, and then I was going to watch their world collapse. Grant's investigator worked fast. By Thursday morning, I had a comprehensive report on both Hazel's recent activities and Pacific Research Lab's current projects. The news was worse than I'd expected. Your wife hasn't been working on any legitimate trials for the past 6 weeks, Grant explained during our morning meeting. She's been using her security access to download proprietary research data from completed studies. He showed me a timeline his investigator had compiled. Every time Hazel claimed to be working late or attending meetings, she was actually in the lab after hours, copying files to external drives. What kind of files? Clinical trial results, safety data, regulatory submissions, information that pharmaceutical companies pay millions to develop and would pay millions to steal. Grant pulled out another document, a surveillance photo taken outside Pacific Research Labs. It showed Hazel leaving the building at 11 p.m. on Tuesday, carrying a laptop bag and looking around nervously. She's been meeting Damon at various locations around the city, always late at night, always in places with minimal security cameras. They're being very careful about not being seen together. How much data has she stolen? Based on her computer access logs, probably dozens of completed studies. The financial value could be in the hundreds of millions. I felt sick. This wasn't just an affair or even simple corporate theft. This was a sophisticated criminal operation that could destroy multiple companies and potentially harm patients who relied on the stolen medications. There's something else, Grant continued. My investigator made some calls to pharmaceutical companies that have been experiencing unusual competitive pressures lately. 3 different companies have lost major contracts to competitors who seem to have inside information about their research. Companies that used Pacific Research Labs? Exactly. Someone has been selling their stolen data to the highest bidders. Grant showed me financial records for a shell company registered in Delaware. This company has received over $2 million in payments from various pharmaceutical firms over the past year. The money flows through several offshore accounts before being distributed to smaller accounts controlled by Damon Vossel. $2 million? The number was staggering, and that's just what we can trace. There are probably other accounts, other transactions we haven't identified yet. I thought about Hazel's new clothes, her expensive dinners, her sudden interest in staying out late. I'd assumed she was just having an affair, but she'd actually been funding a criminal enterprise that had already generated millions in illegal profits. What happens now? I asked. That depends on what you want to happen. We have enough evidence to contact the FBI and have both of them arrested, or we can wait and gather more evidence to ensure the case is airtight. How long would we wait? Based on the messages you found, they're planning something for today. If we can document that transaction, we'll have them completely cornered on multiple federal charges. I made a decision that surprised even me. Let's wait. I want to catch them in the act. Grant looked concerned. Rylan, that's risky. If something goes wrong, if they realize they're being watched, they could destroy evidence or flee the country. They won't realize anything. Hazel thinks I'm a trusting husband who doesn't pay attention to details. She's about to learn how wrong she is. That afternoon, I went home and waited. Hazel had texted to say she'd be working late again. Another emergency project that required her immediate attention. According to the messages on her burner phone, she was supposed to meet Damon at 8 p.m. to deliver the final batch of stolen data. At 7:30, I drove to the parking lot across from the Marriott downtown, where Grant's investigator had set up surveillance equipment. We had a clear view of the hotel entrance and the parking garage where Damon's car was waiting. There, the investigator said, pointing to a silver Honda Accord pulling into the garage. That's your wife. I watched through binoculars as Hazel got out of her car carrying a large laptop bag. She looked around carefully before walking to the hotel entrance, moving with the practiced caution of someone who had done this many times before. Damon's already upstairs, the investigator continued. Room 1247, same room from the keycard you found. We waited. 20 minutes later, Hazel emerged from the hotel empty-handed. The laptop bag was gone. Package delivered, Grant said grimly. Now we wait to see who picks it up. We didn't wait long. At 9:15, a black SUV pulled up to the hotel entrance. A man in an expensive suit got out, entered the hotel, and returned 10 minutes later carrying the same laptop bag Hazel had delivered. You recognize him? The investigator asked, handing me the binoculars. I studied the man's face as he loaded the laptop bag into his SUV. He was middle-aged, well-dressed, with the kind of confident bearing that suggested significant wealth or power. Never seen him before? That's Marcus Webb, Grant said, checking his notes. He's a senior executive at Titan Pharmaceuticals, one of the largest drug companies in the country. The pieces clicked into place. Hazel and Damon weren't just stealing research data. They were selling it to Titan Pharmaceuticals, which was using the information to undercut competitors and win lucrative contracts. We need to follow him, I said. Already on it, the investigator replied. He spoke into a radio, coordinating with other surveillance teams positioned around the city. We followed the black SUV through downtown Portland, maintaining a careful distance. Webb drove directly to Titan Pharmaceuticals' corporate headquarters, a gleaming tower in the Pearl District. He's going straight to the office, Grant observed. They're not even trying to hide what they're doing. Why would they? As far as they know, no one suspects anything. We watched Webb enter the building through the executive parking garage. Lights came on in a corner office on the 40th floor. That's Webb's office, the investigator confirmed. He's probably uploading the stolen data to Titan's servers right now. I felt a mixture of rage and satisfaction. Rage at the scope of the betrayal. My wife hadn't just cheated on me, she'd orchestrated a multi-million conspiracy that was harming innocent people and companies. But satisfaction, too, because now I had all the evidence I needed to destroy her. What's our next move? I asked Grant. We contact the FBI. Tonight. This is a federal crime involving interstate commerce, corporate espionage, and conspiracy. They'll want to move fast before any evidence can be destroyed. Do it. Grant made the call from his car, speaking to a contact at the FBI's white-collar crime division. The conversation was brief and professional. They want to meet with us tomorrow morning, he said after hanging up. They'll need to see all our evidence and get a formal statement from you. What about Hazel? They'll probably arrest her tomorrow afternoon, along with Damon and Webb. Once they have the evidence we've gathered, the case should be straightforward. I drove home in a daze, trying to process the magnitude of what was about to happen. In less than 24 hours, my wife would be in federal custody, facing charges that could result in decades in prison. I found Hazel in our living room, watching television and eating ice cream from the container. She looked relaxed and happy, like someone who had just completed a successful project. "How was your day?" she asked without looking away from the screen. "Productive," I said. "Yours?" "Good. We finished the Morrison trial analysis. Dr. Patterson was very pleased with the results." Another lie, delivered with the same casual confidence she'd been using for months. I wondered if she felt any guilt about deceiving me, or if the money had made it easier to rationalize her actions. "That's great," I said. "I'm proud of you." She smiled and offered me the ice cream container. "Want some? It's that flavor you like, salted caramel." I accepted the spoon and sat beside her on the couch, sharing ice cream and watching a romantic comedy, pretending we were a normal couple having a normal evening. It was the last normal moment we would ever have together. The FBI agents arrived at Grant's office at 8 a.m. sharp. Agent Sarah Chen from White Collar Crime and Agent Mike Torres from the Cybercrime Division. They were younger than I'd expected, probably in their early 30s, but they carried themselves with the kind of professional competence that inspired confidence. "Mr. Ventor," Agent Chen began, "we've reviewed the preliminary evidence your attorney provided. This appears to be a significant case involving multiple federal crimes. I spent 2 hours walking them through everything I'd discovered. The hotel keycards, the cash deposits, the stolen research data, the meetings with Marcus Webb, the offshore financial transactions. The agents took detailed notes and asked pointed questions about timelines and evidence sources." "We'll need to verify some of this information independently," Agent Torres explained. "But based on what you've shown us, we have probable cause for arrests and search warrants." "How quickly can you move?" Grant asked. "Today," Agent Chen replied. "We'll coordinate with Pacific Research Labs to secure their computer systems and prevent any evidence destruction. Arrests will happen simultaneously this afternoon." "What about my wife?" I asked. "Mrs. Ventor will be arrested at her workplace around 3 p.m. Mr. Vossel will be taken into custody at the same time, and Mr. Webb will be arrested at Titan Pharmaceuticals." The clinical efficiency of their planning was both impressive and terrifying. In a few hours, 3 people would have their lives completely destroyed based largely on evidence I'd provided. "Mr. Ventor," Agent Chen continued, "we need to discuss your role going forward. You'll likely be called as a witness in the federal trial, which could take place 6 months to a year from now." "What about my marriage?" The agents exchanged glances. "That's outside our jurisdiction," Agent Torres said diplomatically. "But given the nature of the charges, your wife will probably be in federal custody for an extended period." I left the FBI meeting feeling like I'd just triggered a controlled demolition. Everything was proceeding according to plan, but the destruction would be total and irreversible. I drove to my office and tried to focus on work, but concentration was impossible. Every few minutes, I found myself checking my phone for updates from Grant or thinking about what Hazel was doing at that moment. Was she stealing more data? Meeting with Damon? Planning their next transaction? At 2:45 p.m., my phone rang. Grant's number. "It's happening," he said. "FBI just entered Pacific Research Labs. They're executing search warrants and making arrests. Hazel?" "In custody, along with 2 other employees who were apparently involved in the scheme." I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that the criminal enterprise had been stopped, but sadness that my marriage was officially over. "What happens now?" "The FBI will search your house this evening. It's standard procedure in cases like this. They'll be looking for evidence that Hazel stored stolen data at home." "Will I be there?" "You can be, but you don't have to be. Given your cooperation with the investigation, you're not considered a suspect." I decided to be there. I wanted to see how the house looked when it was being treated as a crime scene. The FBI search team arrived at 6 p.m., 4 agents with boxes of equipment and evidence bags. They were polite but thorough, systematically examining every room, every computer, every piece of electronic equipment. They found Hazel's burner phone in her purse, along with several USB drives hidden in her jewelry box. One of the drives contained over 50 gigabytes of stolen research data, enough evidence to support multiple federal charges. "Mr. Ventor," Agent Chen said as the search concluded, "your wife is being held at the Federal Detention Center downtown. She'll have an arraignment hearing tomorrow morning." "Can I see her?" "That's up to you. But I should warn you. She's been asking for you since her arrest. She wants to explain what happened." I thought about that conversation, about what Hazel might say to justify months of lies and criminal activity. Part of me wanted to hear her explanation, to understand how the woman I'd married had become someone capable of such elaborate deception. But the engineer in me knew that explanations were irrelevant. Structural damage was structural damage, regardless of the cause. "I'll think about it," I told Agent Chen. That night, I sat alone in our house, my house now, I supposed, trying to process the day's events. The FBI had been efficient and professional, but their search had left subtle signs of disruption everywhere. Drawers slightly askew, books not quite aligned on shelves, furniture moved a few inches from its original position. The house felt different now, like a structure that had been stress-tested beyond its design limits. It was still standing, but something fundamental had changed. My phone rang around 10 p.m. Unknown number. "Hello? Rylan, it's me." Hazel's voice calling from the detention center. "How did you get permission to call?" I told them it was an emergency, a family emergency. "What kind of emergency?" "Rylan, I need you to listen to me. This isn't what it looks like. I can explain everything." "I'm listening." "Not over the phone. Can you come see me tomorrow? Before the hearing?" I could hear desperation in her voice, a tone I'd never heard before. The confident, controlled woman who had been lying to me for months was gone, replaced by someone who sounded genuinely frightened. "Hazel, I know about Damon. I know about the stolen data, the offshore accounts, the meetings with Marcus Webb. I know everything." A long silence. Then, "How?" "I hired an investigator. I've been watching you for weeks." Another silence, longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice was different, smaller, defeated. "You turned me in. You turned yourself in. I just documented it." "Rylan, please. There are things you don't understand. I was trying to protect you." "Protect me from what?" "I can't explain over the phone. Please come see me tomorrow." The line went silent. She'd hung up, or the call had been terminated by the detention center's phone system. I sat in my empty house thinking about her final words. "I was trying to protect you." It sounded like another lie, but there had been something in her voice, a note of genuine desperation that made me wonder if there were aspects of this situation I still didn't understand. I made a decision that surprised even me. I would go see Hazel tomorrow, before her arraignment hearing. Not because I believed her explanations, but because I needed to understand how completely I'd been deceived. The engineer in me demanded a complete structural analysis, even if the building was already scheduled for demolition. The Federal Detention Center was a concrete fortress in southeast Portland, surrounded by razor wire and security cameras. I arrived at 8 a.m. for visiting hours, passing through multiple security checkpoints before being led to a small room with plastic chairs and bulletproof glass. Hazel appeared after a 10-minute wait, escorted by a guard and wearing an orange jumpsuit that made her look younger and more vulnerable. She sat across from me, separated by the glass partition, and picked up the phone. "Thank you for coming," she said. "You have 20 minutes. Start talking." She took a deep breath, organizing her thoughts. "Rylan, everything I did was because Damon was threatening you." "Threatening me how?" "He found out about your work on the Bend Hospital project. He said he had connections who could make sure you never worked on another government contract." I studied her face, looking for signs of deception. "That's your explanation? You committed federal crimes because someone threatened my career." "It's more complicated than that. Damon has connections to people who can ruin your reputation, get you blacklisted from major projects. He showed me examples of engineers whose careers were destroyed by false accusations of safety violations." "So you decided to steal millions of research data to protect me?" "I decided to give him what he wanted so he'd leave us alone, but then he kept asking for more, and I couldn't stop." I leaned back in my chair, processing her words. It was possible she was telling the truth about the initial threats, but her explanation didn't account for the offshore bank accounts, the luxury hotels, the months of elaborate deception. "Hazel, the FBI found evidence that you and Damon have made over $2 million from selling stolen data. That's not protection money. That's a criminal enterprise." Her composure cracked. "I know how it looks, but I was scared. Damon said if I tried to stop, he'd hurt both of us." "Then why didn't you come to me? Why didn't you call the police?" "Because I'd already stolen data by then. He had evidence that could send me to prison. I was trapped." I wanted to believe her, but the timeline didn't make sense. According to the FBI's evidence, Hazel had been accessing research files for months before she ever met Damon. The criminal activity had started long before any threats. "Hazel, when did you first meet Damon?" 6 months ago, at a pharmaceutical conference in Seattle." "The FBI says you've been stealing data for over a year." She looked down at her hands. I was doing small things before that, just copying files, not selling them. I thought it might be useful someday." The truth was finally emerging. Hazel hadn't been coerced into criminal activity. She'd been planning it for over a year. Meeting Damon had simply provided her with a buyer for the data she was already stealing. Why? I asked. We have a good life. You have a good job. Why risk everything for money? Because it wasn't enough, she said quietly. Do you know what it's like being married to someone who designs hospitals and bridges? Everyone thinks you're so noble, so important. But I'm just a lab technician who processes other people's research. You're a research coordinator. You have a master's degree. I'm a glorified data entry clerk, and you know it. I wanted to do something significant, something that mattered. I stared at her through the bulletproof glass, trying to reconcile this bitter, resentful woman with the person I'd been married to for 7 years. So you decided to commit federal crimes? I decided to take control of my life. The money was just a bonus. The honesty was startling and horrible. She hadn't been protecting me or responding to threats. She'd been acting out of envy and ambition, using our marriage as cover for a sophisticated criminal operation. What about Damon? Was any of that real? She shrugged. He's useful. Good at finding buyers, good at moving money. But it was never about him. It looked like more than business from where I was sitting. I needed him to trust me. Men are easier to manipulate when they think you're attracted to them. The casual cruelty of that statement hit me like a physical blow. She'd been manipulating everyone, me, Damon, her coworkers, her buyers, with the same calculating efficiency. Hazel, do you understand what you've done? People could have gotten hurt because of the data you stole. Patients who needed those medications, companies that invested millions in research. That's not my responsibility. I just moved information from one place to another. I realized then that she genuinely didn't understand the magnitude of her crimes. In her mind, she'd simply found a clever way to make money from her access to valuable information. The broader consequences, the harm to patients, companies, and individuals, were abstractions that didn't factor into her moral calculations. The FBI says you're facing 20 to 30 years in federal prison. For the first time, she looked genuinely frightened. That's why I need your help. You could testify about the threats Damon made, about how I was coerced. But you weren't coerced. You could say you believed I was. You could say I seemed scared, that I was acting strangely. You want me to commit perjury? I want you to help your wife. My wife wouldn't have asked me to commit perjury. The guard appeared behind her, indicating that visiting time was over. Hazel pressed her hand against the glass. Rylan, please. I know I made mistakes, but I'm still the woman you married. I'm still the person you love. I stood up and placed my hand against the glass opposite hers, looking directly into her eyes. No, I said. You're not. I left the detention center and drove directly to Grant's office, where he was preparing for Hazel's arraignment hearing. How did it go? He asked. She's guilty of everything they're charging her with, and probably more. She wants me to lie under oath to help her defense. Grant nodded grimly. That's not uncommon in cases like this. Family members often feel pressure to provide false testimony. I won't do it. Good. Perjury charges would destroy your career and probably land you in prison alongside her. What happens now? The arraignment is this afternoon. Hazel will probably plead not guilty and request bail, but given the flight risk and the severity of the charges, she'll likely remain in custody until trial. How long until trial? 6 to 12 months, but there's a good chance she'll accept a plea bargain before then. The evidence is overwhelming. I thought about the woman I'd just visited, sitting in a federal detention cell, finally facing the consequences of her choices. Part of me felt sorry for her, but a larger part felt relief that the deception was finally over. Grant, I want to file for divorce. Are you sure? You might want to wait until the criminal case is resolved. I'm sure. I want it done as quickly as possible. All right. Given the circumstances, it should be straightforward. Adultery, criminal activity, irreconcilable differences. We can probably have it finalized within 60 days. I left Grant's office feeling like I'd just completed the most important engineering project of my life. I'd identified a structural problem, analyzed its scope, gathered evidence, and executed a controlled demolition. The building was gone, but the foundation was still solid. I drove home to my empty house and began planning what to build next. That evening, I received a text message from an unknown number. Thank you for stopping them. You saved a lot of lives. It was signed Dr. Patricia Morrison, the researcher whose stolen trial data had been used to manipulate drug approvals. I realized then that my investigation had accomplished something beyond personal revenge. By exposing Hazel and Damon's operation, I'd prevented further harm to patients who depended on accurate medical research. Sometimes the most important engineering work happens when you tear down structures that were built on faulty foundations. 3 weeks later, I received word that Hazel had accepted a plea bargain, 15 years in federal prison in exchange for cooperation with ongoing investigations into pharmaceutical fraud. Damon received 18 years. Marcus Webb was sentenced to 12 years and ordered to pay $50 million in restitution. I never saw Hazel again, but I kept the house we'd shared and eventually turned her former office into a workshop where I designed custom furniture. It's therapeutic work, creating beautiful, functional objects from raw materials, building things that will last. The Bend Hospital project was completed on schedule and under budget. It's considered one of the most innovative medical facilities in the Pacific Northwest, with advanced safety systems and earthquake-resistant design. I'm proud of that building. It's built on a solid foundation, and it will serve the community for generations, just like a good marriage should be.